Thank you, Jeff, and thanks, Jeff and the team, for hosting today. It's such a pleasure to be back with the Unconvention family. I think I've missed it more than my own family, although don't tell them that. Hopefully they're not streaming this. I think the last panel of the day, we haven't got much time, so we're going to jump straight into it, but it touches on some of the things, particularly Ed was just talking about, that we were talking about in the first panel with the MVT, about the importance of the local scenes to the music ecology. And each region, each town, each village has its own little ecosystem. People rely on music as a form of entertainment, escapism, but also as a form of work. So it's a key part of the Build Back Better that the industry talks about, that the government's talking about. So as I say, without further ado, I'm just going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves and give us a little brief sense of who they are, what they do, and what the last sort of 12, 15 months have been like. I'm going to start way over there and come this way. So, Jay.
Hello, yes, I'm Jay, and I run my label Pillar Artists in Newcastle upon Tyne. I don't have a Geordie accent, as is evident, but in terms of the Northeast, there have been some positives over the pandemic. I mean, there was a lot in the news about the big socially distanced utilita, sort of like 1,000-cap gigs they were essentially doing with the likes of Sam Fender was playing, and they had the Pale White and Martha, you know, a lot of Northeast artists, but then also bigger ones too. And as a city, I think they really embraced the socially distanced gigs. So I think as a sort of like starting point for Newcastle and the Northeast there, that was possibly the biggest thing for them over the last 12 to 16 months.
I'll come back on some of this. Yazin, next to you.
Hi, I'm Yasin. So I run HQ Familiar in Leicester, which is a record label. Also run a recording studio. We do recording, community music as well, like community projects. Also do promotion and stuff. So the last 18 months been a bit crazy. You know, like the studio closed down for quite a bit, and you know the gigs stopped. So I think we switched quite a lot to the digital side. You know, we kind of switched a lot, mainly to creation, really. So, which is going to be good coming soon, because we've got like about 6-7 EPs. We've got loads of music videos. We're quite good on live streaming and stuff now. So we kind of just shifted focus. It was a bit of a shock in the beginning. I think a lot of the artists were really struggling, you know, not being able to go out and perform, and obviously, you know, there's seeing a lot of knock-on effects, people not earning money and stuff. So it's been a weird time where it's been kind of quite hard, but there's also been, you know, a few silver linings, and you know, I think, you know, we're going to come back stronger than ever. So it's been a weird time, but we're positive going forward.
Oh, that's good to hear. Chris?
Yeah, so I'm Chris Sherrington. I run a 150-cap venue in York called the Fulford Arms. I've also worked for Independent Venue Week, but I also co-founded, along with my colleague Harcrit, who's up there, York Music Venues Network. And I've been working for the last 15-16 months as a regional coordinator for Music Venues Trust. I think for York, it's been really a difficult time because we've had everyone shut, as everyone else has seen. But I think the main thing is that we've been able to focus on looking back at archives, looking back at raising the cultural importance of venues and what they mean to the city. We've done some work with local universities. We've been able to take time, basically, which we would never normally have, to focus on other things and look at how the ecosystem of York has historically been, where it is now, and where it goes to in the future. And I think the main thing is that we've been able to raise the importance of the cultural spaces that we've got. We've joined in with the Cultural Leaders Group in York. We've managed to raise funds for venues. We've managed to apply for cultural recovery funding, and through the great work with Music Venues Trust, being able to help the venue survive and also see how that affects the rest of the ecosystem in the city, working with rehearsal rooms, working with the universities and with all the musicians and everything. And we personally at our venue have been able to kind of focus on other things such as doing recording and streaming, which is something we'd always wanted to do but never had the time to do. So it's been a real challenge, and it's been difficult to not hear live music, but it's been a good time to be able to focus on what else we can do.
Great stuff. Rose?
Hi, yes, I'm Rose Goodship. I run Cornwall Music Network. We are a regional-based music service that looks at supporting the development of music within the region. Particularly as we're on a peninsula, we found that there's a huge barrier to us connecting in nationally and sometimes attending national skills events and networking opportunities. And the one thing that the outbreak actually did was enable us to connect with all the live streaming events, with some of those big showcases. So it actually meant that we felt more connected, if anything. The other thing is that we found that our beautiful outdoor venues were a real blessing at this time. And actually we've had some really, really great performances. And those sorts of spaces now are vital, and we're really, really celebrating them. So it has been a time to really highlight Cornwall as a region and as a market leader in the outdoor touring circuit.
Fantastic. I'll pick up on that in a sec. Sally.
Hi everybody, I'm Sally Lampert. I'm one of the directors of Hastings Fat Tuesday, which is an arts organisation that delivers a range of live music events and learning engagement projects across Hastings and St Leonards. It includes a 5-day music and Mardi Gras festival that sees us supporting 20 venues, 400 artists, and it happens to be the largest music and Mardi Gras event in the UK.
Well, I'm going to jump straight in. How has COVID and the pandemic affected, the running of Mardi Gras and perhaps the business element?
Well, we were really fortunate in a way because Hastings Fat Tuesday happens at the end of February, so in 2020. We'd actually just finished the festival, and when lockdown happened, it was at a time when normally we're beginning to take stock and we're beginning to plan for the next year. For us, it became quite obvious that that wasn't going to happen, but we were really lucky to have Arts Council funding, which meant that we were able then to think about redelivering a slightly different programme. We sort of made the decision that we weren't going to go digital. We had the opportunity, we spoke to a few people, but we just thought that actually at that moment in time that there was such a plethora of sort of digital material out there that there was an element of sort of almost digital apathy. So what we decided to do was to focus, I think, very much on what our core work is, which is providing platforms for musicians. So we're going to be hosting a one-day music festival on 28th of August, so showcasing 25 local Hastings artists. We're also going to be launching, or relaunching actually, our Under the Radar programme for emerging artists. So it'll be a monthly music slot with co-curated with BBC Introducing. We'll be delivering some learning and engagement opportunities. And then we're also going to be running a 2-day sonic festival that will bring together electronic, experimental, audiovisual. And hopefully that will segue into Fat Tuesday 2022.
Wow, that's quite a lot. So it seems, so you've adapted rather than changed or pivot. I mean, as you've mentioned that you changed, the studios closed down, artists weren't making money. Talk through the process. How did you physically do that? You must have had bills to pay, you had the studio to run. What happened there and what did you do?
So we was quite lucky, to be honest, because we got, I got the grants for having the rates, the business grants, for being a rates payer, and then I got a bit of funding from Arts Council and some from Youth Music. And to be honest, that just gave us a bit of breathing space, so we knew, at least we can pay all the bills. We could keep the essential freelance staff that we had. And what we did so that we could continue working, at least in some form, is we bought some like iPads and little keyboards and, little bits and bobs that we could take to the people. So we could take that to them, and then we did like online tuition through Zoom. We did Zoom meetings so we could still kind of get everybody together. And then with some of the most, some people would just really need that one-to-one. We just found ways of doing it still in a socially distanced way, so it weren't easy, but it was I suppose it was quite interesting, you know, like it forced us to get a lot more digital, you know, and I think, again, with being regional, being in Leicester, you know, we're quite disconnected from a lot of the music industry, you know, especially the bigger people, you know, so I think, you know, being able to all of a sudden get in a room with anyone on Zoom was a really good thing, you know, so I joined like the Association of Independent Music and the Music Managers Forum, and, you know, connected with loads of different people so we could get advice from them around what pots of funding there were, or, you know, I suppose how we could change what we were doing, you know, so kind of seeing what was working for other people, trying to use some of that, and kind of just working with the people that are around us to say, well, what can we do, you know, so we can just make something still, you know, how can we create still, how can we do something just so that people weren't just sat at home getting depressed and anxious and worried about, you know, what they're going to do next, you know, and I think being in Leicester was, we were locked down the longest, you know, so it was a really hard time in Leicester, and there was a lot of people kind of quite negative and stuff, so we just really focused on being positive and trying to find any way really just to keep things moving. And, you know, like the digital stuff is all right, you know, like we did the live streams and we managed to pull it off quite well, but obviously it's not, you don't get that same buzz you do from being in in a venue and, you know, really getting to see people. So we've done a few socially distanced events as well, which were good. In some ways they were maybe even better because we actually sold them out, and you know, like there was people, I think because there was maybe paid a bit more attention to the artists, and you know, so it was kind of like people were a bit more involved. But so I think we'll probably carry on in some respects with some of the stuff that we've implemented. So some gigs won't be fully socially distanced, but we might make sure we've got seats, you know, so people can sit and watch the show rather than, you know, that awkward moment where everyone's waiting to see who's going to be the first person to dance or whatever. It's usually whoever gets drunk the quickest. And yeah, so some of the live stream stuff will continue as well, because we realised we might get 200 people in the shed or 100 people and have a good gig, but maybe we can do a stream and get 20,000 views on it, or, you know, like something like this again, you know, you got people all around the world watching, so I think we will probably merge the two now, you know, and have live gigs that we also live stream. So I think it's a weird thing where I think a lot of people, not to be bad, but I think it's kind of separated, I think, in some ways, people who are innovative and, you know, can find ways, and maybe some people who have maybe not done so well, maybe it's because they couldn't really adapt, and, you know, not to be bad, maybe they wouldn't have lasted that long anyway, do you know what? So it was kind of a bit of a weird thing where some people was in a really bad position and they just kind of sat there, and I think some people just worked tirelessly to find, you know, well, what can we do? Where's the angle? So that's what we did.
And out of that new business opportunity, so you're going to sort of do a blend or a mix of both. So you've learned some, I mean, I think I've got this from everyone actually, that you've all, during this period of, because we've had to sort of reflect on our own practices and what we were doing, and thinking, well, actually, was that model that we've just gone along with because we're used to it, you know, is that the right way, you know, to continue in the future? And you're saying you're going to have a blend and keep some of the live streams on? And,
yeah, definitely. Yeah. I think you can get so comfortable in doing what you do, you know, you don't really need to change. You know, it's like if it ain't broke, don't fix it, innit? But then it's like, well, when you're kind of forced to change, it's like, oh, actually, you know, like, generally something might come at the end of your comfort zone. So we've found, it's like we started looking into publishing and sync and stuff a bit more, and we've had a few good syncs that have eclipsed all the money we've earned from streams and stuff. So might not have had the time to put the research in and make the connections and kind of go down that road. So I think, yeah, it's been good for learning, and I think just taking a little bit of time to stop, look around and say, well, let's move back differently. So we'll definitely keep it blended now.
And what about you, Rose, in terms of, sorry, I'll come back to you a sec, just because Cornwall is such a huge area, you know, you've never had that sort of cluster of music, you know, industry, so you've always had to work remotely and network. Has your work changed? Has it been better to connect with those remoter areas around the county, or?
Yeah, I think definitely we found that connectivity has been key in this period of time, and as I said earlier, that actually connecting more nationally has been easier. Looking forward, though, one of the things that we've looked at is this hybrid working model, and actually how we can both bring people in that live space, but by having a streamed audience, we're actually being more inclusive, and that if public transport isn't there at night time so that people in very, very rural areas can't reach us, actually that hybrid model is really accessible for people. And vice versa, for the people who are digitally excluded within rural spaces, that can be quite a large percentage of the audience, starting to bring in performances into village halls, but streaming them across several village halls or small music venues in those spaces has actually enabled us to look at more innovative models. And I think there's a real enthusiasm and interest in that now, where there might not have been previously.
Sally, so I interrupted you, wanted to jump in. So.
No, I was just going to say that actually this period of time has, in a way, has been really helpful, because it has given us this opportunity to sort of take a step back and reflect on what we do. You know, when you work with, you know, with the festival, we finish the festival, we almost have a week off, and then it's like you're back in again, and it's actually what it's enabled us to do. And also, I think with the funding, not actually being able to utilize this funding in a slightly different way, it's just meant that we can restructure the organization, we can make ourselves more robust, so that we can actually continue to deliver the work in the future. And I think absolutely, going forward, that hybrid option is the way ahead, purely because it does give us the opportunity, I think, to make what we do more accessible and more inclusive. And, you know, within Hastings, we have, even within that area, we have some outlying regions that are, that we've actually really struggled to get people to come down into the town, which seems really strange. It's like, you know, 2-3 miles. But actually, by having that opportunity to live stream, and so that people can actually watch things in their own home, they're in a comfortable environment, those sort of things are becoming, I think, more and more important.
So just, I want to turn to Chris in a sec, but just before I do that, so the three of you talked about streaming, Jay, I think you mentioned it as well. Are you worried that the audiences might not come back in 10 days' time, whenever it is, the 19th? Is that a concern for any of you?
Yes.
Who wants to answer?
Yeah, it is, actually, because I think there is still a nervousness around. I think there's a massive enthusiasm, you know, people are desperate for some, you know, live music and to get back in there, but there is also a nervousness. I mean, the first event that we're doing is an outdoor event. It's a 2,000 capacity. You know, normally it would be 5,000, so we're already looking at reduced figures. I don't think we would be confident of doing something that size in an indoor venue. I think that would worry us a little bit, but you know, there's lots of people out there who are succeeding in filling venues with dates further into the summer.
So the other venues in Hastings, is the Winter Gardens?
So the White Rock they're currently doing some lower capacity. So we've got this strange mix in Hastings where we have this 1,500 capacity venue. We don't have any medium-sized, and then we have sort of 300, 350 downwards. And the White Rock is opening, I think it's opening this week with activity. And a lot of the other venues in Hastings, we've got a few bespoke music venues, but I think, as Beverly was saying this morning, a lot of grassroots music happens in other places. So it happens in pubs, in art centres, and that's where most of the live music really happens in Hastings.
And what about in Newcastle, Jay? Are you, as a promoter, are you nervous about reopening? Do you think there'll be an appetite for it, or will you run both streaming and live? Or?
Yeah, I haven't thought so much about that. I mean, I've got some gigs tentatively booked in from September onwards. You know, it's trying to gauge what people want to do. You know, especially somewhere like Newcastle, which is where they love their football so much. You know, it's still that thing of trying to get people to go to gigs, you know, to spend that time and money instead of elsewhere, which could be in nightclubs, it could be at the match, it could be doing absolutely anything. I think the people that are into their music will come back, but it'll be the same thing. It'll be that sort of erring on the side of caution. I think there'll still be a lot of cautious gigs, you know, slightly bigger venues. A lot of breweries then have sort of been putting on gigs over the last few months, and I think a lot of those gigs will continue. So I don't think they'll go straight back to 60 capacity gigs or 100 capacity gigs that would have been the norm. I think there'll still be a lot of sort of like 200-300 cap breweries and venues like the Clooney that will continue to do have distance, you know, rather than jump straight back in at the deep end. But I mean, time will tell.
How does that sit with you then, Chris? Because you program at the 440, 150 cap?
Yeah, we're 150. I think for my own venue, there's a concern because, I mean, we are a small venue and we're that 150 is based on how much space we have on the floor, not on fire exits. I think the thing to consider is that it really depends on the venue. It depends on the audience. We have venues in York who have got massive spaces but are limited on their capacity because of fire exits. And so for them, actually, you can quite happily go to a gig, have your own space, and they can accommodate for that. And I think it's a consideration. We're talking yesterday with all the venues that it's really important to just see what get that feedback from your customers, what they feel is important for them, and that it will be different for not just in that venue. It will be different for each event. We have at my venue, we have a young indie crowd, we have a punk crowd who want to get in mosh pits, and we've got an older folk crowd. We've got all sorts. So you have to kind of cater to each of those. I think from a personal thing, what I've seen as far as ticket sales and from events going on is that people do want to get back to gigs. They want to know that they're going to happen. We had circumstances last year where we had lots of rescheduling and people weren't buying tickets for shows because there was that uncertainty. As soon as you got to a point where there was a socially distanced show that you knew was going to happen, they sold out. So there was that kind of, no, we want to go back to gigs. They want to know it's safe, and of course that's something that venues need to deal with and promoters need to deal with. But it is really, I think there's a real feel that people do want to get back in. And to go to the streaming question, do I worry that people are going to stay at home and watch streams? I think that there is a good opportunity that actually will reach a national audience and international audience. But I think the local audience and for the venues, we're people travelling from all over the country to come to our venue. I think they'll still make those journeys. I think they still want to have that live experience. I think from everyone who's here today has been saying that it's nice to see people, it's nice to be in a venue, have that interaction that you don't get through a screen. And it is really important for people to be able to actually experience that live. So I do think there's a real need. And one of the things that MVT have been working on now is this Revive Live campaign, which got announced this week. And one of the challenges when we first started to look at that was to talk to agents who obviously have been pushing national tours back as far as they can because they want to make sure they can happen, but say to them, actually venues are ready to put on shows as soon as opening happens in that week. So your artists also want to go and tour, so let's help facilitate that. Let's get people back into venues and show that it is a safe space to be. And I think as well, people have spent a lot of time, Jeff with all the work here to make everything safe. People have got a real understanding, and we're in the right industry for managing risk. And I think our customers trust that. So it's been really important to see.
Just on that then, are you worried? This might sound a daft question. It might be difficult to get to book bands because there's such a desire for bands to get back on the road, and things have been pushed back on the tours. I know we're not talking at the mega level, but are you worried that there might be a problem, or all of you actually, in terms of booking, or you find it's almost as busy as normal?
It's busier than normal, I think, is what we're seeing. We've had shows that have been rescheduled from last year. I was actually listening to Harker on the phone to someone earlier saying, there's this concern that we're basically trying to put 18 months worth of programming into 6 months. And so there needs to be the flexibility to make that happen. There's a concern that there might not be enough appetite of an audience to get out there because of the fact they're suddenly bombarded with 18 months worth of shows, and everyone goes, I want to see every gig. Well, there's going to be a lot of clashes. And I think with the regional aspect of things, something that's been really important is that cooperation between venues. I felt really lucky at the beginning when lockdown first happened that we in York got this network already, that we were working with MBT, because if there hadn't been that cooperation, we felt so isolated. And the one thing that's come from COVID is we've all faced one challenge. You know, normally we're all facing different challenges as to whether it's licensing or development or, you know, whatever individual challenge that venue has, or leaking roofs, whatever it is. In this, every venue had a similar challenge. Every artist had a similar challenge, which was, how can we deal with this? How can we perform? And we were really lucky, because of the work that MBT had done and what we'd done locally, to be able to say, we can talk to each other. We're not all competing, and we can kind of share this thing. And it's been really good to be able to cooperate on putting on shows. As I say, we've got a very small space. We've not opened as a venue at all, but we've been able to work with other venues to put on shows outside, to use other spaces, and to talk to people in the council and the city and use other open spaces, which I think we were kind of a step ahead in York, because we were able to already have those conversations. And it's been really positive to see the power of that regional network and see how that continues as we reopen, because we've been having promoters talking to each other saying, I'm going to put on a show on this date. Does that clash with something you've got on? And it's really good to kind of see that cooperation, which something that 10 years ago would not have been there in any shape or fashion.
I think that was evident as well from the first panel when they, the organisations are talking together. And in Birmingham, I'm from Birmingham, and there's definitely been a sea change in terms of the cooperation between promoters, live venues, but also booking staff, agents, etc., bands, rehearsal spaces. And I wonder, again, I'm going to go ask you all, are you seeing that reflected in your own areas in terms of this new sense of perhaps working differently, working more collaboratively? And do you think that will sustain itself, or do you think 3-5 years time we might go back to how it was 5 years or so ago? I keep looking at you, so I'm not expecting you to answer it first.
Shall I?
If you want.
Yeah, I mean, Hastings is a small town, so, because of that, we do cooperate quite a lot. A lot of the venues, we're there to support the venues. As an organisation, we really do want to support those grassroots sort of artists within those venue spaces. And I mean, certainly, actually, just before first COVID lockdown, we organised a meeting with basically getting all the local venues together, meeting with arts councils so that we could actually have, get them in the same space, same room, to see if we can get some funding to help support and develop them. And I think those sort of initiatives will continue. Is in answer?
Yes. Rose, have you seen that in Cornwall? It's slightly different because it's such a big area.
And certainly we see that as our vision and mission moving forward, is to maintain that relationship. And one of the things we did find as well was that we've got some really established and quite large production companies based in Cornwall that are normally off and out of the county, and suddenly they were back home and able to pause, and they really, really gave back to our emerging talent and that relationship, where they're now looking at whether those artists are going to play support slots for larger tours and things like that. Those relationships are vital, and I do think that's really, really changed the opportunities for emerging talent in the region. So I really, really hope so, and it's how we do that moving forward that I think we really need to work out.
And that's part of the discussion that you're having now. So we've done it because we had to, but how do we now sustain it for the next 5-10 years?
Yeah, and how do we fund that as well moving forward, definitely.
Yeah, so how's it been in Leicester?
So I think in Leicester, so I don't own a venue, and obviously I've not been doing any live events and stuff. I know some of the venue owners have been kind of just, to be honest, a lot of them have been doing refurbishing the venues and stuff like that because they've had bits of funding and stuff. Promotions-wise, I'm not so sure. I don't know if there's been loads of meetings going on behind the scenes that I've not been invited to. There might have been. But I think a lot of the times, when things are funded and there's maybe a financial incentive, sometimes that's more likely to go ahead. And I think in reality, when you've got loads of small business owners and loads of promoters and stuff, I think as soon as it gets busy, with the best intention in the world, everyone will go back to doing what they do, which is their day-to-day, do you know what I mean? Because we've not got time to message 20 promoters, see who's booking who, things change a lot. So I think it's I think there might be kind of more of a thing where we want to try and make the scene bigger, and we might want to try and support each other, but not necessarily in a way that everybody's going to be, you know, kind of checking with, you know, like, I think people always talk about these types of things, and unless there's some funding or incentive to actually pay for your time to attend the meetings, or to, you know, to put that extra work in, I think generally people will just, before you know it, everything will be back to normal, hopefully. And I think, kind of going back to the last question, I think in Leicester, I think everyone's just really eager to get out, and I think people, not just to get out, because we've been getting out, but, you know, like, you can't dance, everything's so restrictive. I think people just want to get back to dancing and enjoying themselves and hugging people, and, you know, like, not necessarily worrying about masks all the time. So I feel like things will be kind of busier than before. I think people will stream it from further afield, but I think things will get busy, and I think people will just, I think it'll be a great vibe. I think people have missed it all for so long that there will be a few cautious people, but I think that will fizzle away with a few drinks.
And other substances that may be available.
Yeah, and I think that's it. I think, for me, well, obviously we hope things will go back to normal, and I think there will be a bit of a boost of the venues have all got themselves done up a little bit. You know, everyone's had not necessarily a break, 'cause we've all been working still, but maybe in a different way, you know, but, you know, coming back, you know, fresh, and, you know, so I think, yeah, there'll be some partnerships that will stand that test of time if they've been built well. But I do think, not to be negative, but I do think a lot of it will just go back to normal,
just the sheer pressure of day to day, getting your bills paid. And
best intentions of the world, innit? Everybody, you know, even like with stuff like this, and, you know, with networking events, you know, you'll go and you'll meet people and you'll come away with loads of emails and stuff. Some of them you will end up becoming contacts with, and you'll follow up. Some, there's just not enough time, there's not enough hours in the day, is there? So you kind of, you know, you just end up getting back to where you were.
I would say on that, I think that's the biggest challenge. And I know, Sarah, I still remember a couple of years ago, you know, is time, because the fact that we do spend, you know, my venue programs 260 events, and you finish one, you go straight to the next thing. And I still remember when Harkrit kind of came to me and said, yeah, this is a really good idea, we should do this regional network. I was just there going, wonderful, I don't have the time to do this. And I don't think we're any going to be able to get on it. And I'm so glad that we did. And I think that's the thing from a regional network point of thing, is to say, okay, well, it's not going to necessarily financially benefit me now. And it's a real challenge, I think, for, you know, small business owners, for any one artist to kind of go, well, I need to make time to do this. You can't make time, you're doing all these shows. But to take that step back and to be involved in something has paid off so much more. I mean, personally, it's completely changed my life, because I've gone from kind of just focusing on doing the venue stuff to being involved in doing these networks and working for MBT. But also, we've managed to secure funding that we would never have got, because we managed to go together as a group to the council and say we need support. And, you know, over the last year, we've earned much more money from being able to kind of work together as a group. And it is a real challenge. I think that's going to be the biggest difficulty, is getting people to not just focus on the business that they have, and be able to kind of be out. And I think that'll be a big challenge.
Joe, have you noticed anything in Newcastle? Has there been more collaborative working practices?
Yeah, there's an increasing amount of collaboration, and I think a big one was in 2019, myself and others put together the Northern Music Collective, which was a group of promoters mainly, to try and minimize gig clashes and just to increase the communication between us. You know, instead of having on one night 5 indie gigs that then have 50 people come along, it'd be like, you know, you can still do those gigs, but let's have one of those be an indie genre, have one as a folk one, maybe one as punk, and just try to think a bit smarter in that sense, instead of all trying to claw for the same audience and ultimately divide them. And through that, that's then been growing in terms of having other people join that aren't just promoters, but also managers or people involved, interested in being involved as a label or any other capacity in the music industry. And from that, there's been talk, particularly throughout the pandemic, of offering more of a sort of like mentorship program. You know, there's so many young people in the Northeast announcing that they're doing different things, whether it's zines, whether they're throwing their hat in the ring to be a promoter or be involved with management. And just having support and some direction, or at least feeling like there are people that you can speak to, you know, go through your own journey, but at least try and avoid some of the mistakes that other people have had, because more often than not, there's no right or wrong way to do something, but often other people can give advice against mistakes that they've made. And even if it just means that people avoid some of the same pitfalls that they have, that can go miles in terms of helping someone's confidence and doing what they do. So in the Northeast, there's been that, and increasingly collaboration between the different cities and towns in the surrounding areas. So, you know, not just Newcastle itself, it's not a particularly big city, but when you start to link it up with like the wider population of Gateshead and Durham and Sunderland and Stockton and Middlesbrough and Hartlepool, suddenly you've got a big population and a vast number of venues and inner city festivals and people that are involved in management or run their own labels. And more people are becoming interconnected in that sense. So I think as a region, I think it's a good starting place, but it'll be interesting to see how it develops over the next 5 or 10 years. But I think there's huge potential there.
I should, say, if anyone's got any questions, just raise your hands or shout out and we'll take them. So feel free to get your questions ready. In Birmingham, the two things that I think have come out is the public sector. So some of the arts and cultural organisations get funded by the Arts Council, etc. I've worked really closely with commercial organisations, and it's opened the eyes of commercial organisations to funding. So that's been a great start, particularly through the Culture Fund. And then out of that, they've just recently, the West Midlands Combined Authority have helped launch a music board. So I think there's one in Manchester already and maybe Liverpool. So out of the pandemic, there's now a collective voice, and they're going to gather data. They're going to have a, look at how they build back after the pandemic. So, we can see the shoots of recovery and it being taken seriously by those sorts of cultural and governmental organisations, which is great for the sector there. And Chris, I wanted to sort of ask you, but you touched it on your introduction. I'm just interested about, you were saying, making the case about a venue, and it was talked about earlier, not just being a pub or a room, but actually being, both really important as cultural spaces and having cultural value, but also as placemaking and tourism and marketing. Just, can you talk a little bit about that work, and are those types of organisations now accepting that argument, actually, that we do have to protect, particularly grassroots venues?
Yeah, and I think, again, it's a challenge that we've always had over the last, ever since the industry has been come into the pop culture, is that we've been seen as the toilet circuit, and there's this phrasing, and again, credit to MBT for kind of rephrasing that and saying, well, actually, these are grassroots music venues, this is where things come through, and it's important to kind of get rid of that vision that people have of music venues and these spaces, and to be able to challenge that and to raise that cultural awareness that actually these are spaces that not only have an important part on everyone's lives, but also have got a really big, national ecosystem, but also at a local level, around rehearsal rooms, around producers, around studios, and form a key part of that. And are culturally important spaces. One of the challenges that we had in York particularly was that there was no venue that really lasted for more than 10 years. There was a real change of venues due to mainly development challenges, where spaces were having to change, and there was very few, venues had moved and kept the name, but there wasn't that history. And one of the key things that we've been able to find is that by raising awareness of looking at archives and getting people's memories, it helps people go, oh yeah, well that was an important space, what happened to that? And then you can kind of go, well, okay, well that's gone, and we need to make sure that doesn't happen again. Raising awareness of the bands that have used these spaces, the scenes that have gone above it. And we've been quite lucky in York because we've had bands that have kind of started to develop and reach a national. It's not just Shed 7 anymore. There's local indie bands who are getting signed, like Hound Hum and Bull, and that's really helped raise awareness of the music scene in York. And there is that thing that if you start getting people's memories, you start making people think about why these spaces are important, then you can go to the council and say, you need to look after these spaces, you need to look after the importance of this industry, and you need to gather facts as well. Something that MBT's been really good at is getting details about what it means financially, what it means, historically to these spaces. And then you can go to the councils and say, you need to protect this. We're just as important as the opera house or as the museum or as the theatre. And people start to take notice of that and they want to support that. And it's a very difficult thing to do because, again, either things change, we're not very good at talking to council, I think, in general, and to government as an industry. We want to get on and create. And we're not very good at raising public funds because we've never had to rely on that. Theatres and productions in that area tend to rely on getting money in advance. And I think that's been something that's been really interesting to see. And for a lot of the venues who have gone through culture recovery, one of the biggest questions on that is, are you a culturally important space? And they found it quite difficult to show that because they've never had to tell people about that. So doing these archiving projects and working on research has been able to kind of say, actually, no, these are the bands that played here. This is the careers that they've started to form, and show that to people. And even such a simple thing as keeping a note of every band that played at your venue, getting people to sign the wall, getting people to keep the posters, means that next time they can go to the council and go to funders and say, I'm important, this is what we've done, this is who we've affected. But again, we tend to not get time to do that. So there has been a real challenge about that. And it is, even just in those 2-3 years, it's been really weird to see the change culturally, of getting everyone in the council executive in York to stand up and almost argue, as not knocking at Andy earlier when he was talking about the gigs he'd been to, but say, oh yes, I've been to these gigs. And it was really weird to see everyone in the council say, yes, this is important. Once you've got that, you can say, okay, well, you need to do something about this person who's complaining next door because they've just moved in. Or you need to deal with this noise issue, whatever development issue you've got, whatever planning issue there is. You suddenly had everyone in the council say, yeah, we like culture. Okay, well, prove that.
Prove it,
And as I say, I mean, even just last week, it's been amazing to be in a meeting with the council where they've said, oh yeah, we're going to put some money your way. For the first time ever.
So you are actually seeing the benefits of, it is hard, isn't it, in terms of having to get the data and all those sorts of things lined up, but it's bearing results.
it really helps. And I think the difficulty then, the challenge for venues, is to be able to cope with moving from that model where you are fighting to sell alcohol as much as you can, to being able to kind of go, oh, actually, we do want public funding. People should be recognising the importance of the venues and looking at how you support that, how you program for it as well. And that's a real challenge I think that venues are going to have to face, not just let's get as many rock and roll tribute bands on a Friday night so we can sell more beer.
Audience awareness and audience building, they call it, don't they? Which is really a really difficult thing to do, particularly coming out of the pandemic. We haven't got too much time. Has anyone got any questions yet? So, yeah, did everyone catch that? Yeah, has anyone got that experience or?
I would say Cornwall has definitely been doing that anyway. Part of having rural touring spaces is that eclectic, how do we build audiences for different types of work? We have worked quite closely with something called the In Crowd, which puts poetry and music into pubs. And that's been great. I forgot comedy as well, but mixing poetry, comedy and music together gave us a really diverse audience, a really interesting audience, and some really great and diverse stories that we told as well. And moving forward, and when we talk about hybrid models as well, it can be quite difficult to book an act that's a comedy act that might have a 20-minute set and still get a full-bound audience to that. So if we've got a more eclectic mix of artists, we've got musicians and comedians working together, and then we can live stream that, actually that gives us a really good opportunity to provide something that's a bit more financially viable and also has that guarantee for those artists.
Fantastic. Anyone else? Any experience of sort of multifunctional spaces or programming across different art forms, cultures?
I think there's been hints of it with organisations like Sofa Sounds across the UK and the world, reimagining any space whatsoever. The Newcastle team will put gigs on anywhere. I mean, they keep on trying to use people's homes because that's how it all started, as an intimate setting, but they're always on the lookout for any venue whatsoever. You know, they've put on shows in restaurants and more traditional venues and reimagined it that way. Places like the Cluny have then also done like cinema nights as well, but I think there's vast potential for these venues and people that make these events to do that cross-pollination between cultural, well, all aspects of culture. Almost reimagining it as like a sort of like modern day cabaret, I guess, to some degree.
Just on one thing as well, I think it's important, it's a two-way thing. I think that the venues need to be open to people to come in and use the spaces. And in New York, we've seen art exhibitions at places like the Crescent, which have been really successful, getting people in during times when you wouldn't normally be open. We need to really think about the fact that, say, I'll go back to this idea that we've been relying on selling alcohol. People aren't drinking as much alcohol. We need to look at when people use your space, being open during the day and using spaces as rehearsal rooms and making it open. But also, I think there needs to be a lot more outreach from the venues into the communities to kind of use other spaces. One of the most amazing that I've been to this year was done by the Brudenell and the Crescent, where they took over York Minster and put on a local band in the Minster, which is something that we'd never think of, you know, in normal times. And it's not only just kind of encouraging people to come in, but for you to reach out into the community as well and use other spaces, be involved in, you know, local programming and booking. And yeah, just really, I mean, we've been quite lucky in being able to use our space for filming, but then take our filming crews elsewhere. So I think there are real challenges to do that, but it does really benefit yourselves, and it's a long-term plan, because we need to really realise that in 10 years' time, people, the people who are coming to gigs are going to change their behaviours, and we need to focus on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point about alcohol. I mean, you know, my lad, he doesn't no interest in drinking at all, and so the revenue from there. We've only got, I think, if I see, about a minute and a half left. I had 2 questions, but we probably won't get to them. We've talked about the ecology and the ecosystem of music. A quick round here. Are you worried, or have you seen a loss of freelancers? So stage, lighting, rigging, sound engineers, have they left the industry, and are you worried that they won't be replaced and there'll be a deficit of skills and knowledge in that area?
I don't know, well, about leaving the industry. There hasn't really been any work for them, so they've had to do other jobs.
Yeah, so, or they might not come back.
So they might not come back. I mean, that I don't know. I think if the work is there, then I think they'll be desperate to come back, but it's making sure that there is continuous work. I think anybody involved in touring in particular, particularly international touring, is a massive issue. From, you know, drivers to lorries to, you know, stagehands, etc. So I think that is a real issue.
And that must be really difficult in Cornwall as well, because you're built on tourism and hospitality and hotels and all that sort of stuff. Is there a concern there?
Yeah, I think, again, we don't really know yet who might not choose to return. I've definitely noticed that having conversations with people that actually, if they have been out touring, now they kind of want to stay in Cornwall and write music and be in that beautiful space. And actually that lifestyle perhaps isn't the thing that they want anymore. And so touring has changed in that sense. We found that the retainment because house prices have gone up astronomically within our region, actually being able to afford to live within Cornwall is now becoming quite difficult. And so a lot of those freelancers are having to work elsewhere and having to go elsewhere. So you find in the hospitality sector that we are struggling to get bar staff and things like that within our venues and our spaces. Throw in having to isolate within that is having an impact now. So it's kind of a wait and see for the moment.
Yeah. And of course, there's Brexit coming as well. I think we've run out of time. Yes, well, I'm getting the nod. Thank you so much. I think, more now than ever, I mean, it's been a great project to be part of the regional music scenes, because there's so much that, is common amongst the different areas. We have different ways of approaches, but so much commonality between us. And I feel coming out of COVID and going into Brexit, there will be, regional music scenes will be more important than they've ever been. And they play a huge part in the wider music industry and ecology. So thank you for all your work. Thank you for your time. Good luck as you go on. And thank you for staying with us till 5:30 on a fairly sunny day outside. Jeff, did you want to say a few words?